until you accept your own desires pretty well, so you get a good handle on them, it's really hard to be safe for someone else, right? To actually see them as they are and accept them if you're still all reacting to your own stuff. So first you work out your shit, and then you learn to listen and just accept that someone's desires are there they are, right? And be able to see them without trying to decide anything about them.
So, welcome to the Give and Consent podcast. I'm Jamie, your host, and I'm here because my goal with this is to introduce you to the people and ideas behind sex positivity. And today I'm excited to be talking to Anton Fulmen, who is going to talk to us specifically about BDSM and in particular dominance, because he's written 2 books on the subject. So, thank you for joining me, Anton.
Thanks for having me. Something I always love to talk about.
Awesome. So the first thing I thought that we could get into is, for one, I want to specifically say this episode is really about BDSM and kink, and I'm using those terms kind of interchangeably. And we want to dive deep on the topic. If for those who are watching, if you go back to my Lee Harrington interview, you'll find some more that's more about the basics of BDSM. So what I'd like to get into first is we kind of have these prescribed models that come in kink, where we think like, this is what a dominant is supposed to be. This is what a master is supposed to be. The perfect submissive is a certain way. And I understand that for you saying that's not necessarily a healthy way to get started in the scene. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think you put it pretty well. It's not healthy and not helpful for a lot of folks. I call these one true ways, the sort of pre-packaged models of what a submissive looks like or what a dominant looks like. And a lot of folks, when they're just starting out, have absorbed one of these that gives them a very limited view of what they think dominance and submission, or kink in general, has to look like. Some really common ones are like the sort of story of O or 50 Shades of Grey model of the, it's always kind of a woman who's in the submissive role. There's lots of protocol, there's lots of spankings, there's very little negotiation. And you don't have to have your power exchange look like that, right? It doesn't have to involve spankings. There's another is the old guard idea of what gay leather culture looked like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that people have made up all these myths and legends around that say, well, if you're gonna do power exchange right, you have to start as a bottom and you have to work to earn your leathers before you can top. So if you're someone who doesn't want to start as a bottom, you can think, well, maybe I'm not allowed to do this. So these models are really they get in people's way, because if it's not what your passion really calls you for, but you think it's what you have to do to be doing it right, you can get stymied, or you can get kind of pulled into doing a kind of kink that isn't really what you wanted.
So what is your way of actually getting into the scene then? Because I think we kind of idealize this thing that we think kink is supposed to be, and then you actually try it and things change. So how do you actually explore safely?
Yeah, slowly, right? Um, you you dip a toe is what I always recommend to people. I actually I worked as a sort of a more general sex educator for about a decade with San Francisco Sex Information, um, teaching about, we'd talk to different audiences for different reasons. So we'd teach about all kinds of topics in sexuality, from pregnancy prevention to kink to anything you can think of. And I realized that no matter what the context was, the one piece of advice I was giving most frequently was slow down. Like, it applies to starting relationships, It applies to penis vagina sex. It applies to starting a flogging. Just slow down is like the universal sex ed advice. And where people get into trouble with trying to come into kink or enter the community or start doing kinky stuff is they decide that they have to jump in whole hog. That, I've got fantasies of being someone's total power exchange slave for life. So the first thing I'm going to do is write a personal ad that says, make me your total power exchange slave for life. Bad idea, right? You don't really know what you want yet because you haven't really tried it yet. You only know what you think you want. And you don't really know how it works. You don't know how to tell how experienced other people are yet. You don't have a grounding of friends and community to help support you. You don't even know what language to use. So start small. This is difficult. Well, everything's difficult in the time of the plague years, where you can't just do what you'd normally do, which is find the closest social event to you and go hang out at the social event and say hi to some people and keep your clothes on. But you can find um, online social venues to go, like, find a place where people are talking about kink and just kind of hang out and be a wallflower for a minute and start to get a sense of the language and who the people are and what they're up to. And then eventually, notice someone who seems like you kind of like them and they have a good head on their shoulders, and start talking to them, and slowly work your way in is the way to get the farthest and have the best experience.
Yeah, and I know also the community, because of the lockdown, there's also lots of great online events happening, which is maybe not ideal for meeting new people, but it is something.
Yeah.
Uh,
It even has some advantages, especially for folks who are living in places where there aren't a lot of in-person events that are near them. I've talked to some folks when I do online classes. I talk to people who say that since the pandemic began, their access to kink community has actually grown because they didn't have anything near them before, and now everything went online and they can participate. So depends on your situation, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. So for those that are in kinky relationships, and right now especially, you're probably just with your one person or a very small. What do you say to those who are not getting the dynamic they want? Like, they're submissive and they're not getting enough of that, or they're dominant and they're submissive, maybe not cooperating or doing the things that they said that they wanted to do.
Or maybe just not doesn't have the as much enthusiasm for it as you wish they would, right? I think I think it's a near universal challenge of relationships that partner is usually more into it than the other one, or more into some aspect of it than the other one. And kink's no different. Um, it's a there's some complexity there. There isn't like one answer to give that fixes it all, right? If there was, we would have fixed it. But some things that I think are important. One is to acknowledge that it's very, very common that one partner wants things more than the other partner does, and that's going to have to be okay to some degree. Right? It's you to be perfectly matched in all ways is a little unrealistic. So you're going to have to negotiate some kind of difference with the person who wants it more, um, chilling out a little bit, and the one who wants it less, maybe stretching a little bit, and meeting in the middle. Two is that to get um, more of the thing that you want with your partner. And I think this is true for more than just power exchange, but it's especially true for power exchange. It works better to um, offer more from your side rather than to demand more from them. So if your example, you're someone who is looking for submission, and they're not getting as much dominance as they want from their partner, to say, you don't dominate me enough, dominate me more, I'm unsatisfied, more than likely is going to end up in your partner withdrawing more. They feel criticized, they feel like they can't do anything right, they feel like they're not enough. It's not conducive to leaning into something as vulnerable and juicy as power exchange. But if you can find ways to kind of offer more submission instead of demanding more dominance, you're more likely to encourage them, right? So regularly coming to your partner and saying, I'm free tonight and I would love to serve you. Is there anything I can do for you? Is probably better than complaining about not getting enough dominance. The other way around is a little more delicate, because you have to understand how to offer dominance, not push dominance, right? Just ordering your partner around more is not probably going to help if they want DS less than you do. But you can kind of step into a leadership role in ways that are helpful for them, is one of the great ways to kind of offer dominance. You can, what's a good way to put it? Yeah, do a good job of taking charge in the ways that they welcome you taking charge, and they're more likely to want to lean into asking you to take charge more. So that means that in the ways that they do offer you submission, really take it up. Be really conscientious and thoughtful about making those DS experiences into experiences that really feed their submission, rather than just like give them a few swats and then do what you wanted to them. Figure out what they wanted and feed that need of theirs, and it'll grow.
Yeah, I love that, because I think what you're really hitting at the heart of the matter is that a DS dynamic, a dominant submissive dynamic, can start feeling abusive to a point if there's not that point of meeting each other in the middle. And that's not where we want to go with this. We want there to be this to be a consensual experience where everyone's getting a need met. I wonder if you could speak to people coming to terms with desire, because on both sides of a DS dynamic, it can be hard to put into words what your desires are, and even come to terms with it yourself.
Yeah, and that's the very root step. The
Hmm.
first bit of the foundation of making power exchange good is coming to terms with your own desire. And I think that for a lot of us, it's a really extended or even a lifetime process, um, that we keep investigating our desires and kind of getting more comfortable with them. Because for a lot of folks who are into, I'd say, the BDSM kinds of kink, right? So kink is this sort of very broad thing that basically anything can be a kink, but BDSM being the whips and chains parts of that, the control, the pain, the power, the playing with sort of dark and aversive things. Um, they're dark and aversive. They really
Hmm.
are. So it can be the greater your desire for them, and the farther down that rabbit hole your desires take you, more of a genuine challenge it can be to kind of sort it out in your head and come to terms with it. And I think the first thing that I want to say, because I think not enough people say it, is that it's not just a matter of getting over it, right?
Mm.
Of realize that this is fine and everything's permitted, and you just need to stop feeling shame about your desires. Um, I don't think that actually works super well for dark and aversive kinds of desires. And I think that some of the things that we want in power in BDSM like actually do have ethical issues attached to them, and that we need to not just ignore our concerns about those issues, but resolve them, think them through, find good ways to get what we want in ways that don't cause harm.
I think also an important piece of this is creating a safe space for people because we are in BDSM, like talking about whips and chains, it's dangerous. How do people create that safe space for each other?
Yeah, another big question. Um, so I talk mostly about, well, so the the whips and the chains can be physically dangerous, and the answer there is maybe simpler in that it's a matter of learning technique and taking it seriously, right? Uh, Many of the the practices that people participate in around BDSM have risks associated with them, and there's a big enough community with enough activity that you can do a little online research and do a pretty good job of finding out what those risks are. So, you know, get out there and do your reading before you jump into that hot kind of play that you saw on a porno video, right?
Yeah.
That's maybe the more straightforward part of it to answer, and the less straightforward part is the side that I deal with more because it's more about the power and authority of DS as opposed to the broader BDSM is the emotional and the intimate safety, right? Um, Being creating a space where it is safe for your partner to share those vulnerable, tricky, delicate, dark desires of theirs with you and know that you're not going to judge them for their desires and that you're not going to think that they're silly or or that they're not kinky enough or that they're sick, but that you're going to be able to talk with them about what they want and about what you want. And I mentioned before how like, self-acceptance is like the first part of the foundation. Here's part of the reason why, right? Until you accept your own desires pretty well, until you get a good handle on them, it's really hard to be safe for someone else, right? To actually see them as they are and accept them if you're still all reacting to your own stuff. Um, so first you work out your shit, and then you learn to listen and just accept that someone's desires are there they are, right? And be able to see them without trying to decide anything about them, right? Just let them be there without saying, ooh, that's gross, or like, oh, that's so sexy. Let me tell you what I think about it. Just like listen to them first until they are satisfied that you can hear them, and that you can see them uh, without judgment. It also gets back to your first question, what
Mhm.
about the one true ways and the prescriptive models of power exchange, because one of the ways that folks end up fucking this up most often is they've got an idea in their head about what a dominant has to look like. And when they're trying to interact with a partner, they don't hear what that partner is really telling them about what they want because they're too busy trying to like force them into this mold in their head, saying, well, okay, you told me that you told me that you're a masochist, so I know all these things about you now, and that's how I'm going to treat you, regardless of what you said about what you wanted. So you got to get rid of those one true ways and open up to your partner.
I love that you specifically got into masochism because I feel like that's a hard one for people, for one, to accept about themselves, for two, to do safely,
Mhm.
and then for three, for the other person to hear it. Like, that's a label that I've flirted with, but I've been very turned off by exactly what you're talking about, where people then decided it meant I like all forms of pain, No, I don't. I'm very particular about what I like because every person is a little bit different.
Hmm.
Um, I'm curious because you said this a couple times. I didn't specifically ask. You're saying there's this broader BDSM and then there's DS dynamics. What is the difference between those two things?
The first thing to get about this is that none of these terms around kink have super sharp, crystal clear definitions to them. Where the thing we're talking about is a matter of human passion, and I mean forbidden human passion at that. It doesn't have like crystal clear distinctions between this kind of kink and that kind of kink, right? They don't really come in nice little cookie cutter boxes. So everything's kind of fuzzy at the edges. But roughly, BDSM is power, pain, restraint. It's sort of playing with dark and scary things. DS, or dominance and submission, is a part of that, and it is specifically the parts that touch on power, authority, control. It's consensual bossing around. And part of those prescriptive ideas about how you have to play, one of the common ones is that if you do any BDSM sort of stuff, that means you do all of it. Right? That if you're going to be a submissive, that means that you also get tied up and you get beaten, and dressed as a pony or something. But really, it doesn't work that way, right? I don't know of anyone who is into every single thing that falls under the BDSM umbrella. You pick and choose. So someone might be really interested in taking a submissive role, but totally not interested in being whipped, or having the leather clothes, or going out to play parties, and they just want to have a relationship where their partner takes the lead role and just purely DS and no other aspects. That seemed like a good way of distinguishing BDSM from DS?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, you're the expert. Um, I love that because it is very personal. We did an exercise because you came down to Ventura and actually taught a class for us, where we had put up all these pictures on the wall that had nothing to do with BDSM. So there's no people, there's no whips or chains. It was like traffic, it was trees, it was the ocean, it was watch. Those are some of the ones I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to pick a photo that resonates with you when it comes to how you identify in kink. So you're not just going, well, I'm submissive, so that's what this means. It's, let me hold up this picture. And I've actually got a photo behind me, or a 3-part photo, which for me actually has to do a bit with that kind of dynamic. It's a reminder to myself to like keep a childlike nature, don't stop the fun from flowing, because I tend to be a person who can be very serious, and at my best, I'm not super serious. Um, so all of that to lead into this. On the same day, and I'm going to read it off this piece of paper here, is there's a listening exercise that you had the group do, and the question leading into the listening exercise was about power exchange. What would you like to tell me? And the idea was not to respond to it, just to let the person keep talking and really dive in and listen. How does that exercise work? Does it work for people? Do you suggest people do that? Where did that
Just
come from?
sitting around at home, do it with your partner.
Yeah.
You could. Those exercises are a little, they're they're contrived and they're restrictive, um, on purpose, as it's part of a teaching technique to get people to talk and to open up.
Mhm.
That and it Yes, I think it does work. I think it works pretty well. I think it's most important in a classroom kind of setting where people aren't naturally having an intimate conversation anyway. Maybe less important to just do sitting with your partner, but I've actually done pretty much that sort of exercise with partners. Um, and I think you do get to important, intimate stuff. The A big part of the idea of that exercise touches on something we already talked about, which is, listening without judgment. That's really the point. And it's to open up a space for the person who you are prompting to just tell you what's important to them, without getting kind of steamrolled by your perspective on it. So yeah, and it's a form of communication exercise that you'll see used in a lot of other contexts as well. And I didn't make it up. To just say about X, what would you like to tell me? And then let the other person talk, and then just keep prompting for a set period of time. Some folks, a lot of folks, if you ask them, what do you think about sex? They'll give you a 3-word answer and stop. And then if you move on, that's all you hear. But if you then say, okay, what else would you like to tell me about that? Then they'll give you 5 words. And you say, what else would you like to tell me about that? If you do that enough times, you get the whole book because it was in there. It just doesn't all come out the first time.
Yeah, and I oftentimes like to remind people that if something makes you nervous or triggered or whatever word you like to use, you may end up not in your full frame of mind. Like your prefrontal cortex actually shuts down the thinking part of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So you may end up getting someone who's more in like a very reactive, just yeah, whatever you want, and opening it up to talk and not making jokes with the answer, or judging it as really great or really bad. Totally opens it up. Those kinds of conversations, we kind of talked earlier about the flavor and direction that you're taking a dynamic. What do you mean by that?
So flavor is sort of a key word for me. I have my model of how to help think about different kinds of power dynamic that I call the flavors of dominance, which is a list of 6 different major directions that power exchange dynamics tend to take. And again, like I said before, nothing is crystal clear or divided into a fixed number of little boxes about kink. So it's not a model that I say covers absolutely everything that everyone does with power exchange, but an awful lot of what folks do under the banner of power exchange looks like some combination of these 6 elements of control, conquest, service, objectification, nurture, and devaluation. That's a big part of my first book. And being able to have that language of those 6 flavors and talk about which ones appeal to you and how much just gives a way of describing in a little bit more texture what you mean when you say, hi, I would like to submit, because it can mean some very different things. Like someone who wants to submit primarily in a service way might be really fulfilled by being useful, by feeling competent, by getting things done and knowing that they were a good helper for their partner. Whereas someone who is really strongly interested in the control flavor what's going to fulfill them is being very strictly micromanaged down to the tiniest detail and not being allowed to do anything without permission, and being told, stand there quietly, you're only allowed to say these words. So one of them is going to be super helpful for, setting up for and serving your party, because you're going to say, make the party happen, and they're going to be really excited to go do that. And the other one is not going to be useful for that at all, because they don't want to do any little thing that you didn't tell them to do. And that's the idea, is to give a little bit more language around breaking down different kinds of power exchange desires, and to do it in a way that isn't judgmental. Right? None of these flavors is better or worse than any of the others. None of them is deeper or realer. A lot of the way that people often try to sort of subdivide or understand dominance and submission is to break it into hierarchies. They say, well, you've got your true master at the top, and then under that is an alpha dominant, which isn't quite a true master, but is almost there. And then you've got your, your natural dominant, and you're just plain dominant, and it's not very helpful. Different people have different ideas of what all these things actually mean. Um, and there's a lot of jockeying to get to be in the highest status one. Um, so instead of trying to say, oh, well, I'm a daddy or I'm a primal, you can say, these are the flavors I'm most interested in, and have a more sort of textured and judgment-free way of describing what you really want.
Yeah, I love that. I oftentimes describe the BDSM scene as being more like a playground. It's like it's imagination time and what do you want to play today? Because like those words you use, like devaluation, I can imagine people who are not familiar with the scene thinking that's a really bad thing. But for someone being able to play the role where they get to be devalued can be actually really healthy and helpful for that person.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the major themes of BDSM as a whole is things that are usually very bad getting repurposed and transmuted into something that is fulfilling and rewarding and joyous for someone.
I want to talk a little bit about people who are in DS dynamics, maybe more long term, because you were talking about this idea of the scene that never ends. How do you speak to people who are in these long term relationships? How do you keep it healthy and working?
Yeah, we were talking about that, like that transition from not being in a power exchange relationship into being in this like long term. We want to have some element of power exchange in our lives all the time, kind of life. And one of the things that I think people trip over very often is that they've done some kinky scenes before. They've done maybe some power exchange scenes where maybe they did have the sort of micromanaging control dynamic where the submissive just does exactly what they're told to do, and that's really sexy. And then they think, okay, we want to do this as a lifestyle all the time. That's not going to work. You're not going to be able to be precisely micromanaged in person 24 hours of every day. Um, and even if your dynamic isn't that unrealistic, the way that scenes tend to work is that you start off in like a default base state. You're sort of in your normal everyday I'm watching TV state. And then, you ramp up the energy of the scene as it goes. You get more excited and hotter and more like more into it and more into your submissive roles, and people are getting really turned on, and it builds up to some climax. And then boom, it climaxes, and you go back and you go get pizza. Um, but a good scene builds energy throughout the scene. It builds, it gets more intense over time. And if you think that you can have a long-term relationship that just builds energy constantly higher and higher and higher and more intense and more sexy, that's not going to work either. Eventually you burn out, or you get sick of it, or something happens in your life that you can't kind of push aside to keep staying in your super elevated, sexy space. So when you make the transition from doing power exchange in short spurts to doing it regularly, you have to get down with the idea of having an ebb and flow where you build your relationship and you put a power dynamic in it, and it's super exciting, and you're like really into it and really turned on. It's all you think about for a while. But then like it gets kind of normal, and other concerns intrude in your awareness, and it has to kind of be able to ebb and go quiet for a while you just you haven't stopped doing it, but a lot of your energy is somewhere else, and then it has to be able to come back again, right? Which means that you have to not treat it as a failure when it goes into an ebb time. You need to not get like wound up and like anxious and upset about the fact that your excitement and your energy for your dynamic is lower sometimes, because that becomes a vicious cycle where if you get upset about the fact that your dynamic has faded a bit, then it crashes. But if you can kind of roll with that and it be okay that you're paying attention to other stuff for now, then you can, when you've got the time and the energy and the desire, you can bring it back up again.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think it's important to recognize that it's a choice to do it this way, and that like every aspect of your life, there's going to be balancing. Like sometimes, work takes over and you got to put way too much focus on work. So I love that as a taking it more as letting it ebb and flow, just like everything in life.
Yeah. And so much of
Mhm.
the fantasy of power exchange is around ideas like total and complete and ultimate, these very like hard edged, um, completist kind of fantasies where like you think of nothing but surrender all the time, evermore. But people don't really work like that. Um, it's great in fantasy, but really, if you focus on anything 24 hours a day, you'll get bored of it. It's just kind of the way people are built. You got to be able to sort of shift and have more things in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I ask my last question, where can people find you if they're looking for you?
The easiest way is at consensualdominance.com. I've got a website where I just have links to everything I do. So you can find my books there. When I write essays, because my brain has words coming out of it and I have to put them somewhere, I'll write essays. They go up there. You can read the essays for free. And you'll find links to, I now have, since we are in pandemic time where we're doing everything remotely, I've made a couple of online courses that you can sign up for and take about, specifically about deepening the intimacy of a power relationship. So they're for people who are in a relationship already to do with their partners. I guess I should have said that first as what should you do if you are wanting more power exchange
Sign up for your
in a
class.
relationship right now. You could take this course, which is designed to give you exercises to help you do that. I took that picture exercise that you described, and now it's
Mhm.
just pictures on your screen. You can do basically the same exercise.
Nice, nice.
Mhm.
That's
I've
awesome.
also I've got a profile on Facebook that, or I do have a page on Facebook, but I don't do much with it. I have a profile on FetLife that you are welcome to follow if you want to, if you're into uh, social media and want to see what I'm doing on there. But you'll find a link to that on the website too. So go to consensualdominance.com. It's all there.
All right, awesome. Now, my last question is, we are still in this pandemic for when this is going to be released. What is one thing people could do to enrich their kinky lives while we're still in lockdown and we can't go to our usual, go to the dungeon and meet people?
Yeah. Um, well, it depends. I'll give you two answers because it depends on whether you have a partner in your little pandemic bubble or not. Um, if you're in a power exchange relationship, um, the the change in lifestyle of the sort of shelter in place, or whether it's a strict shelter in place or whether you're just sort of spending more time at home, it it's interesting in that it's added possibilities as well as made some things harder. There are games that you can play with a power exchange partner that require you to be nearby one another, right? That weren't practical when somebody was leaving the house for work all the time, that you can do now if you want to. You can do, um, you have to uh, ask permission to go to the bathroom every time because you're in the same house and they can come find you and ask permission to go to the bathroom in a way that was more awkward to do if you were remote. Um, so if you wanted to step up your power exchange, dig into your particular desires around power and find one of those things that you couldn't do because you had to leave the house that you can do now that you have a lifestyle where you don't. Like, submissive partner isn't allowed to wear clothes anymore is like maybe something you can do if they don't have to be on Zoom calls. So also let's acknowledge that it's created more tensions. It sometimes part of how our relationships worked was that we got to be separate for and have a break from it for 8 hours a day. So watch that, right? If you're in a submissive role, actually, I guess either way, regardless of which side you're on, if you're finding that your power exchange feels like a burden to you now, because even if you didn't realize it before, you really needed that time when you were apart out in the world to kind of have some space from it, then don't be shy to ask your partner to create that space somehow, where you could say between this hour and this hour, even though we're like right on top of one another, we're still gonna have like a time when we're on break and we're not gonna think about DS stuff, and I get to just kind of have that in my head. And you might find that that helps you get more deeply and more happily into it in the times when you are on duty. Then the harder answer is if you don't have a partner. And I want to acknowledge that that's rough. It's hard to meet people and it's hard to connect now. I think that I think that power exchange as a discipline can actually help with that a little bit, in that power exchange gives you something connecting and intimate to do that you don't have to be together for. There's all kinds of ways to mess around with authority and control at a distance, in like little flirty ways that you can do even with someone who you don't have a big relationship built up with yet, right? Or a lot of trust. You can still do flirty little things like, inviting this person you're flirting with to decide what underwear you wear at home each day. And, you send them a picture of all the options and they tell you what underwear to wear. And now you've got this little connection and this thing that you're doing together that works great at a distance, in a way that plain vanilla sex or bondage or flogging are more challenged to work at a distance. So look for creative ways that you can flirt in power exchangey sorts of fashion online and with somebody who you're looking to form a relationship with, even with just like fun people in the DS chat room that you find on Discord, because there's lots of those. And you can kind of get your fix with power exchange a lot better than you can get without it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Definitely go check out his work on his website, and just you're a really great teacher too, so I think it's really worth it. Of course, like and subscribe the podcast, and always check out Sex Positive World. We have events going on all the time. We talk about consent, boundaries, and it's always kink friendly. So until next time, we'll see you. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you want to see more, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that we end up in your feed. If you got something out of this personally that was helpful to you, also please leave a comment below. I love hearing the feedback about what's working and what's not. That's what makes this show better. And until next time, love you more, and we'll see you then.